Okay, I think we're going to start. We're on 175. It's Baba Metzia 87b still, page 175. We're going to start on verse 4 there. And what the Talmud's doing right now is analyzing this one verse about a guy that comes into a vineyard, ki tavo b'kerem re'echa. So this is actually from the Torah, from Deuteronomy. Someone comes into a vineyard, and in the verse it says you can take whatever you want. So you're cutting through the vineyard. It doesn't identify who the person is. Later we're going to interpret this as referring only to workers, but in the Torah itself it doesn't say that. It doesn't say it's not, but it just says a person comes into a field. You can take whatever you want, but you can't bring a bucket with you. So you can't bring them home with you. So you're hungry right then, you can take whatever you want, but you can't bring a bucket with you. Later we interpret this to mean just for workers, which apply. So this is what we've been talking about, the obligations that employers have for their employees. So we're just going to go through this, and we stopped with something disturbing last time, so we'll continue with that and then go through it. But I'm going to, just to get us in the right frame of mind, or the logic of the interpretation, verse 4, Amar Rava, Lehilchotav. So we use this verse for several halachot, and for several Jewish laws. Kiditanya. Now we quote from a Baraita. Ki tavo. When a person comes in, focusing on the word tavo there, comes in. V'nemar kan bia, v'nemar lahalan. So in our verse here, it uses the term to come into, lavo, bia, that's the verb. V'nemar lahalan, another verse, lo tavo alav hashemesh, that you have to pay your worker. This is a different verse, also from, I think, Deuteronomy, that pay him before the sun goes down. Ki tavo alav hashemesh, that's the term for the sun going down, has the same tavo. So ma lahalan b'foel, just in that verse, we're dealing with laws dealing with workers. Because clearly in the verse I just quoted, pay in your worker, that deals, the subject there is workers. Hakatu medaber afkan, even this one, so also this one, this is a common method of proof in the Talmud. You take a word, how it applies in one context is how we apply it in another context. In one context is clearly about workers' rights. Here we're also saying, even though the verse about walking through a neighbor's field doesn't mention workers, because of that particular verb, lavo, we're assuming it also refers to workers. Afkan b'poel atatu medaber. So in other words, it's restricting the eating of the grapes when you're walking through a guy's field. If you're a worker, you're allowed to do it. If not, you're not allowed to do it. And then it becomes under the rubric of taking care of our workers. All right, we've done all that. I'm going to keep going. But now we're going to continue the analysis. This is from the Baraita, b'kerem re'echa. So the verse says, when you come into the field of your ra'aya, so re'echa, of your, that's the word we're going to have a hard time with here, your fellow human being. Some of you may have heard the verse v'ahavta l'recha kamocha before, right? The golden rule. Love your, how do you translate that? Love your neighbor. The golden rule you have in Christianity, Judaism, love your neighbor as yourself. The trick really is how you're going to translate that word.
One Hebrew could be friend.
Could be lots of things in Hebrew, right? Your fellow human being, your friend, someone who's close to you, someone's not close to you. So we're very proud of that verse, right? It's the golden rule.
It's like brother in the general term.
Yeah. But what if it only means neighbor, like your next door neighbor, and I don't have to love anybody else, just my next door neighbor? Or what if it just means my fellow Jew, or my fellow white person? I mean, as soon as you're restricting that word, it loses a lot of power. Now, in the Torah, we're sort of covered because we also have a verse, v'ahavta et hager, you love the stranger, and the stranger seems to be everybody who's not your re'echa, right? And your re'echa may be the people that are close to you, but also you have to love the stranger, except that there are, of course, rabbis that interpret the word ger as meaning just people that convert to Judaism, not referring to non-Jews at all. So how we translate these words becomes very important, how we live our lives. Who are we supposed to love? Who are we supposed to take care of? How far do ethics extend? How much do we define ethics as universal, or just referring to our own in-group? So it's a lot going on here. So here, it's just a simple verse here. When you come into the vineyard of your re'echa, of your fellow, yeah.
And the rabbis say ger is just Hebrew gers, because the verse says ki rimetem b'mitzrayim, because you were
Yeah.
on stage in
Right,
Egypt.
right.
How did he reconcile
I
that?
mean, it's almost nonsensical.
We weren't Egyptians.
Yeah, they take it out of context. They take it out of context and they say ger. I mean, to this day, the word for convert is ger. The process is ligayer. The process of conversion is gior. So the idea that ger doesn't refer to stranger, but actually refers to people that convert to Judaism, and so therefore all of the laws loving the stranger really refer to people that convert to Judaism. I mean, that's got an old. I mean, we don't talk about it that much because there's something a little embarrassing about it that we're not actually embracing the really what seems to be a great universal law, ethics in the Torah. We've narrowed. Some of us have narrowed. Shouldn't say we. I mean, there's a tendency in the text. I guess let me finish this before because let's see how it works in this particular context, and then we'll take some comments. So bekerem reyacha, okay, the vineyard of your fellow, velo bekerem nochri. So here it says straight out. This is a baraita. It's one interpretation among many. So he said this wouldn't apply to the vineyard of a non-Jew. Now, what it means there is the idea that you can't bring a bucket wouldn't apply to the vineyard of a non-Jew. If you're in a vineyard of a non-Jew, go ahead and bring a bucket, which means that you can take whatever you want. So the restriction of no, don't bring a bucket as you're walking through a field only applies, according to this interpretation, only applies to the vineyard of your fellow Jew. But if it's a non-Jew, still you take whatever you want, but in that case you could bring a bucket. And so there's two things motivating this particular interpretation. One is just reading the word. The word is reyacha. And reyacha seems to imply someone in your community, someone close to you, so your fellow Jew. That's one motivation. The other motivation might simply be chauvinism, racism. What? It's not like these things don't exist. They exist in the Jewish community. They exist in the Talmud. They exist to this day. So one or both of those may be motivating. In any case, we've got the comment there. If you're going through the field of a non-Jew, this guy says, go ahead and bring a bucket, but if it's a Jew, don't bring a bucket.
Could you interpret the word for non-Jew in a different way? I mean, it's
Nochri. So the word for non-Jew is nochri, which generally means non-Jew. Yeah, strange. Yeah, I mean, it comes from actually, it's an interesting derivation. We could have fun with that too. It comes from lahit naker, which means someone who is alien to you, someone that you don't know well, like lahakir. That seems to be where the word comes from. But it's just a word they use for non-Jew. Keep in mind, I mean, we're just throwing around ideas here too. That's a lot of what the Talmud does. It's throwing around ideas. It's one interpretation among many. Let's play it out, and then we'll take other comments too. Okay.
Just one question.
Because it gets worse. Well, it's like my mother used to always tell me, it gets worse until it gets better. So it also gets better too. Yeah.
The word hakir or nakir?
Lahakir, yeah. Okay. All right. Hanicha, okay, so this is okay. This works. Okay, so if you're telling me the verse means that I shouldn't bring that I'm allowed to bring a bucket with me as I'm cutting through the field of a non-Jew, or by the way, I mean here the way they're interpreting it is if you work for a non-Jew, because that's how they're interpreting it. So now we're not talking about cutting through a field anymore. We're talking about if you're employed by a non-Jew, this interpretation is giving you permission to bring a bucket and take whatever you want. Okay? So that interpretation works. Hanich lemandamar gezel nochri asur. That interpretation works if you're of the opinion that it's forbidden to steal from non-Jews. Okay? Now, you may have all thought that was clear, that it's forbidden to steal from non-Jews, but in fact you have a school of opinion. I'm bursting a lot of bubbles here, but we're reading the Talmud. There is a school of opinion in the Talmud that you're allowed to steal from non-Jews. Now, if you're of the opinion you're allowed to steal from non-Jews, then, of course, you don't need permission then to bring a bucket. You could bring a trunk. You could bring a steamer trunk. Because if you're allowed to steal from non-Jews, there's no limit to it. The limit is don't get caught. Like, don't be an idiot. Don't get caught. But you don't need permission to bring a bucket, not a bucket. So the interpretation of this verse only works for those who think that it's forbidden to steal from non-Jews. So if it's forbidden to steal from non-Jews, okay, then I need permission from the Torah to bring a bucket. But there's those that say, you're always allowed to steal from non-Jews, so bucket, not a bucket, who cares where you're going to put the stuff because you're allowed to take whatever you want, according to that interpretation. I understand that's disturbing. All I'm doing right now is reading, I'm just translating the words the best I can.
What's the rationale
behind it?
Well, so there's two rationales. One is that there's some textual indication that sometimes these laws only apply to Jews. So just reading the text itself. And the other is, what's the rationale for racism, for bigotry? People do it. It's sort of an ugliness in the human heart that no one is invulnerable to.
Is this a straw dog argument, or is this? Or is this a final conclusion?
Oh no. So one thing is, it's not a final conclusion. The final conclusion is you're not allowed to steal from non-Jews. So please don't leave this class with the wrong impression. And you read Steinsaltz's notes, and it goes through the process of the different stages where they decide Jewish law. So the law is you are not allowed to steal from non-Jews. All we're seeing here is that there were rabbis in the Talmud that thought that you were. And without being naive, I mentioned this last week. I occasionally encounter that argument, because I read, ultra-Orthodox magazines and newspapers. So there are people that to this day believe you are allowed to steal from non-Jews, but it's not officially Jewish law. Yeah.
But I think when you say it's racism, from your perspective, but they won't characterize themselves as racist. I think the argument might be, well, they're not God's chosen people. They've turned away from God, so this is part of the punishment. At least some sort of rationalization. And you see this within Islam right now, the same kind of thinking. So it's interesting that in our own history, we have the strain of this kind of thing.
Yeah. So I'll be a little more clear. I'm not saying it's necessarily racism, because that's a tricky word to translate, and it may not apply to the ancient world at all. But I'd say it comes from the same motivation that racism comes from, which is that your in-group is superior to other groups, and therefore that your ethics stops with your group. And that's just
based on what God told you, right?
Yeah. Or based I think it's based on something, based on what God told you, or based on the way you read the text. You can read the text that way. You can find things in it that support it. But I also think there's an element in every human being. By the way, it's not just terrible people. In every human being that prefers their group. And prefers human relations with their group. Most of us here are in that category. We somehow resonate more to our particular group, our particular neighborhood. So the thing is that this is where it's tricky. There are lines, though. For instance, there should be what we would hope is that there's universal ethics where that really do cross the border of your group, and stealing certainly should be one.
What about the law?
Barbara's going to talk. Then I'll talk to you.
You don't need to do superiorism in order to have an us versus them mentality.
Right.
You can have nationalism. This is us. Everyone else is not us.
Right.
And we can only help a certain number of people in the world who can help us.
Right.
And we may not be superior, but this is still us.
Absolutely. There are benign. This is one my Rosh Hashanah sermon. There are benign and even beneficial elements to the kind of tribalism or preferring your own group. It gives you a sense of community. You have to start somewhere. And we have to take care of ourselves. To me, these are all valuable values. However, you do have to balance it with, I think you said it well. There's the superiorism that can somehow come into it, and suddenly you're in ethical dilemma. So you have to think this stuff through. By the way, it's very interesting. I want to just kind of finish a little bit more of this, but I'll say I've been, for various reasons, brushing off some of my college philosophy, and there's a lot of dust to brush off, and reading over some old philosophy texts. But I don't know if anybody studied Spinoza. There was a brief period where I was a philosophy major, and I gave that up pretty quickly. But I'm reading a book now. It's an excellent book about Spinoza. So Spinoza really feels like the root of all evil is I don't know if he would call it nationalism, but any attempt by a human being to value his group identity over but it could be even like your neighborhood or your family, like any attempt by any human being to value their own particular group over understanding that you're part of the human community is for Spinoza the root of all evil and the biggest error the human beings make and the cause of all pain and suffering. So and by Spinoza was a Talmud genius before he was excommunicated. So he would have had access to all these texts and would have spent a lot of time thinking about them. Let's take a few more comments, and then I think we've only studied a line and a half. Actually, the fact is we haven't studied any because it's all been review from last week. Yeah. So 1, 2, 3, and then
So the word chosen was brought up, and I thought chosen was chosen for obligation, not chosen for privilege.
Yeah. So I like.
So what is the thinking on this? Obligation or privilege?
On chosenness?
Yes.
It's obligation and privilege. And look, it depends on which generation is interpreting it. You've got lots of different interpretations of it, and I think, I think we should be, just us here. I mean, we should be rigorous in our understanding of it, where we are privileged to be part of a group that approaches God in astonishing ways, without saying that it also confers upon us any kind of superiority, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
So, I have found that the source of one's strength is the source of one's weakness.
Yeah.
The tribalism, you're saying, well, there's favorable things. The tribalism is essential. Without tribalism, we wouldn't exist as a people. There's no doubt in my mind. So I think we should embrace that, and then talk about, even with that tribalism, well, there are limits to what we, so with Spinoza, you're saying, well, this is the root of all evil. It could be, but it doesn't mean that it's bad in itself. Like the hands are the root of all evil too, but they're also, we build things with them, so we're not going to chop off hands.
I think Spinoza does say it's bad in and of itself, though. I mean, you can disagree with Spinoza, but right, yeah, right, yeah.
There's no overriding law. The Ten Commandments are just not something that's important.
I would say that I would say there are. I think to these people I mean, that's what's interesting is that, you have. So you mentioned the Noahites. So let me answer your question first, too. So this is just a stray opinion that we have in the Talmud. It does represent a strain of thinking. The Talmud is an extremely inclusive book, so it's got all sorts of different ideas in it. It's the challenge in reading the Talmud, and this is later generations, had to find ultimately what the norms were, what the guides were, because you can't figure out what to do from the Talmud. You can't. The Talmud just presents opinion after opinion, not just in ideology, but also in law itself. So here you have a reading of the Ten Commandments, which is less universal than I think is intended. And it seems to me, reading the book, reading the Ten Commandments, it certainly seems to be universal. Do not steal. Do not murder. But there are rabbis here that aren't reading it that way. If you don't mind, let's go on a little bit more, and then we'll see if just want to get somewhere with this. Okay, so so this works for people that think that it's forbidden to steal from non-Jews. So therefore, you need this verse to tell us that it refers to workers. So turn the page now. We'll finish this thought. Ella, rather, Laman Damar Gezel Nochri Mutar. Okay, so now for those that think that stealing from a non-Jew is okay, you don't need that particular interpretation. So they ask, Hashta Gezela Mutar Poel Mibaye. Since stealing is permitted, then why would, and this is what I said before, why would it have to tell us that a worker is not allowed to use a bucket? Okay, I'm going to just answer at that. So what's interesting here, before I answer the question, is that they want the interpretation to work for both schools of thought. So there's two schools of thought. One is that it's forbidden to steal from non-Jews. One, it's permitted to steal from non-Jews. And even though they reject the school of thought that it's permitted to steal from non-Jews, they still want our interpretations of this particular verse to work for both schools of thought, even for a school of thought that they reject. So remember, that's what I said. So that the Talmud is a messy book, in that it's very inclusive. It tries to incorporate all opinions, and they want ultimately, if they can, our other interpretations to fit with all the different opinions, if they can. So that's, you get an example of how inclusive the Talmud could be. So even though there's these Jews out there that think it's permitted to steal from non-Jews, and even though that opinion is ultimately rejected, we want to make sure our interpretations of other verses fit with both sides. So there's something so there's something that binds all the Jewish people together.
Was it included so that it could be shot down?
I don't look. I'd like to say yes,
but you're not sure.
Because the Talmud does that sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes they bring up ridiculous arguments for the very purpose of shooting them down. It doesn't seem that way. I will tell you that Rashi, and it's, for some reason Steinsaltz doesn't, but Rashi references the place in the Talmud where they have this discussion about whether stealing is permitted or forbidden from non-Jews. And what I didn't do is look at that. I mean, I could look at that for next time and see, kind of, and maybe bring some of that in if you're interested. Here, I mean, it just, you notice here, it just comes in by the way. It's really only a couple lines. It's an aside. Yeah, it's an aside. It's pointing out, well, there are people that believe that's permitted to steal from non-Jews. So how do you explain the verse from their perspective? That's all it is. But some of us haven't encountered that yet, so it becomes very shocking. So there is a sugya. It's called sugya. It means a section of the Talmud which deals with this in more detail. But we're not doing that. But the answer, I think, is no. It's not just bringing it up to shoot it down.
I mean, in the Middle East at that time, because Homer alludes to this, treating the stranger in your land was an important thing. Important thing to do.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was prevalent even 3,000 years ago in the writing. So if that was a prevalent thought in the Middle East, then I would imagine it was prevalent also in
the stranger. Yeah. I know this is going to sound a little strange. There's not necessarily a contradiction between treating a stranger well and stealing from a stranger if you have a chance, which I think you also had in the ancient Near East, and maybe have a little bit today too.
The modern.
No, I mean it's like you take care of them. They're a guest in your house. You make sure you protect them, and but you watch your wallet, on your way out. I mean, once you have this sort of group consciousness, and you start to prefer your own group. It's a slippery slope. So just because it's a slippery slope doesn't mean it's impossible to come up with ethics. Here, I disagree with Spinoza too. I think you can come up with ethics that allow for a tight sense of group cohesion and still a universal sense of ethics. I think it's a challenge, but I think it's possible.
It becomes a balance.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that the parsha that has the Ten Commandments is Yitro, who was a non-Jew.
Right.
Ruth, who was a convert from a detested tribe.
Yeah.
Also, so I think there is certainly strains within Judaism that don't say, well, we're better than everybody else. We can't.
Yeah.
They're not important. No, I've always.
Yeah, I mean,
I haven't been the student of a rabbi who would say it is permitted.
Right. And in fact, it's not permitted.
Right.
I mean, the determinative texts that are accepted by the Jewish world across the board forbid it. The Shulchan Aruch and Maimonides, and they've studied this, and they decide, no, you can't steal from a non-Jew. The fact that it's there in the Talmud itself allows for some people that know the Talmud to say, well,
right.
Yeah. So, but it's not dominant. I mean, I think it's not dominant, and I agree. I mean, and I try to be objective, but we're all influenced by the culture around us, and we live in a very universalistic culture. We're very privileged to live in that, and we live in America, where I think America is very ahead of the rest of the world in totally rejecting racism and because the ugly elements of tribalism. They're beautiful elements, but the ugly elements of tribalism. I mean, America's got its problems too, but this is the culture that we live in. This is general Western culture where it is right now. But having said that, and understanding that I'm biased, I still think a fair reading of the tradition is that it's the tradition itself which leads us there. I think that the Bible and later Jewish tradition is actually an element in bringing Western culture to more universal standards of ethics.
Perhaps we've put.
But the other stuff is there. Look, we can't.
Right.
It's there. It's part of our history. It's part of their history. It's part of
And it's something
already
that's a
out there.
challenge we still deal with
Yeah.
every day.
Right.
Perhaps we put our tribalism on to less threatening things like football games
Yeah.
instead of war.
Exactly. That's why everybody should be a sports fan. The world would be a better place. Particularly if people rooted for the teams that I would like to root for. Yeah. Right. We would all get along much better.
But in most of the world, there's total chaos between two teams. They rebel after the game. Oh, we lost. We got to beat them up.
A lot of the world. I mean,
You want to finish telling us why this verse works for people?
Okay, here we go. Yeah. Okay. Verse 4, page 176. Okay. So for them, mokimla. So in other words, reyacha. So for the people that actually think that you're allowed to steal from non-Jews, the reyacha must mean something else. It must have some other limitation, because you don't need to bring a bucket in. If you're allowed to steal, you can bring a bucket. You can bring whatever you want. So you don't need that verse to tell you bring a bucket. Okay, so there the word reyacha means something else, but kerem, remember the word reyacha can mean lots of things. It just means sort of your fellow. And so bekerem reyacha v'lo shel hekdesh. So it means that you cannot bring a bucket into a field. No, you can bring a bucket to a field that belongs to your fellow Jew. Did I say that right? You can't bring a bucket in. You can take where you want. You can bring a bucket into a field that belongs to the government. So the word reyacha means, your fellow citizen, but there's a whole different type of field the field that belongs to, the technical word here is hekdesh. Hekdesh means it's consecrated to the temple precincts, which is another way of saying it belongs to the government. The priests, the government own lots of fields, and if you're cutting through those fields, or you're a worker in those fields, you can use a bucket.
Are those Jewish governments?
Jewish governments, yeah. Jewish governments, yeah.
Universal.
Hekdesh is, yeah. Remember the other thing about the other thing that's another complicating factor here is the original text in the Bible are really only referring to Jewish cultures, Jewish civilization. They're not, non-Jews are a tiny minority. I mean, this, and now we're reading this when we were a minority. So when it says Kerem Re'echa, it's assuming everybody's Jewish, right? And everybody follows the Torah. So now later rabbis of the Talmud live in an era where, wait a second, it's not that everybody's Jewish, it's that we're a minority. So then they're forced by history to make these distinctions between Jews and non-Jews. All right, but now back to a reality where just about everybody in the country is Jewish. So then you've got two types of fields. You've got private fields, and you've got fields that are owned by the temple precincts, by the priests. So, and that's the distinction, the Re'echa. So Re'echa is you and me, our fellow citizens, and them, in this case, the big them is fields that are owned by the government, and that's the distinction. So that's the distinction you can make. If it's not Jew and non-Jew, it's citizen and state, citizen and government. I'll read a little bit more. We're done with that, by the way. So we're done with just that. So all we've had to do, we figured out how we can interpret this verse according to people with different opinions of whether or not you're allowed to steal from non-Jews. Now it continues in interesting ways to limit what you can eat in your employer's field. So I'm going to do that a little bit more, and then it'll be time to stop. V'achalta, so you can eat v'lo motzetz, but you can't suck the juice out. You may only want, because you may be there. I mean, Rashi actually has an interesting explanation of why. If you're just there for the wine, and you think you can get some kind of buzz out of sucking juice out of a grape. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but because it hasn't fermented. But you actually could end up
Sugar high.
Taking more than if you just ate. If you just ate the grapes, then okay, you're eating the grapes, and sooner or later you're gonna stop because you're gonna have enough. But if you're just sucking the juice out and then throwing out the grape, there's a lot more. So you're going to ruin a lot more crops from your employer. So lo motzeit, you cannot sucking. Anavim, so you can eat the grapes. Velo anavim b'davar acher, but you can't eat the grapes and add some kind of spice to make them more tasty. Because if you're adding a spice that makes them more tasty, you'll eat more. So you can't do that. So they're limiting it. They're limiting it based on a little bit common sense, but really on their reading of the verse. Okay, kinafshecha. Okay. You eat your fill. Now the word nafshecha means your fill, but you see the word nefesh there. Nefesh means soul, so your own particular appetite. Kin nefesh shel bal habayit. So the employer here has to assume that the appetite of the worker is the same as the appetite of the employer. Even though you might think the people you hire have less of an appetite than you, because I'm rich and they're poor, so they don't eat as much as me. They don't eat as much as me. So for the worker, for the employer, you're not allowed to think that. But also the employee has to think, I'm only going to eat as much for my fill. I'm not going to overeat. Okay. So kach nafsho kin nefesh shel bal habayit, kach nafsho shel poel. So the appetite of a worker is the same as an employer. Ma nafshecha ochelu patur, just as you as a work. Oh, so that it adds another law. Just as you, the owner, can eat produce in the field, upatur, and it's exempt from tithing. So it throws in another little law here. So if you own a field, you're out there and you're hungry, you can eat as much as you want without tithing. Remember, the law is that all of your produce has to be tithed. It turns out that if you're out in the field and you're picking and you're eating, you don't have to tithe. So you may be tempted just to go out there and eat whatever you want, except that, we're talking about big landowners, and their point is not so much to eat the produce themselves, but their point is to sell it. So, but tithing doesn't hold. It's actually a big exemption for tithing. Tithing doesn't hold for the owner who's out there in the field eating. It also doesn't hold for the worker. So the worker's out there, so it's tax-free. you can call it tax-free. The worker who's eating in the field doesn't have to pay taxes on it. And if you happen to be the owner and you're out there in the field and you're eating, it's also tax-free. You don't have
It's also
to.
not implementable. I mean, who's going to know how much you've eaten and whether you should be tithing? So
Well, God's going to know. So God's going to know. So it's But everybody has to tithe. So workers have to tithe too. So just like everybody has to pay taxes, right? It's death and taxes. I mean, it's some interesting things here about. I'll just finish with this. What's taxable income? This is a benefit. It's a non-taxable benefit. The non-taxable benefit is that you can eat whatever you want on the job, and it's not taxable. Now, if your boss nowadays provides lunch, right? That's a benefit, right? And that's got a certain financial value to it. Here's a question for somebody I don't know. So is it a taxable benefit? I mean, do you know? Is it a taxable benefit? Officially? I see a lot of squinting, but
I think officially it is. But
what? So in the Talmud, officially it isn't. So officially, you don't have to pay taxes on it. But in America, I'm not so sure. There's a lot of benefits that in fact are taxable, and that doesn't mean now are the IRS going to come and check and what was the lunch you ate? But officially it's compensation. Compensation is I don't actually know this, but it seems to me right. Yeah. All right.
Because nobody ever tells you the value of it. So how could you know?